In 1967, an international secret agent was cryogenically frozen in case the world ever required his services again. Now, evil is threatening the Earth, and the time has come to bring him back into the 90s.
It's not unusual.
Allow myself to introduce myself.
Danger Powers personal effects.
Actually, my name is Austin Powers. Danger's my middle name.
I'm gonna need you to sign these release forms.
Okay, name. Sex? Yes, please.
In his time, he was the coolest secret agent alive. Unfortunately,
It's freedom, baby, yeah!
this is not his time. He's a swinger in a square world.
A lot's changed since 1967.
Bring on the sexy stews, man! Yeah!
We're called flight attendants now.
And he's a stranger in a strange land.
This is my mother, Mrs. Exposition.
Lovely.
Austin!
What have you done?
That's not your mother, it's a man, baby!
Why won't this wig come off?
Well, now you shake it to the left, you shake it to the right. You're doing the hippie shake.
Jiggle, jiggle.
Ow! That really hurt! Who throws a shoe? Honestly.
Mike Myers,
Yeah, baby, yeah!
Elizabeth Hurley,
Don't forget these.
Oh, thanks.
Austin Powers. International man of mystery.
Always wanting to have fun, Austin. That's you in a nutshell.
No, this is me in a nutshell. Help! I'm in a nutshell!
All right. Hi, everybody. Happy holidays.
Hello.
It's Zach and Callie. We're back. What month is this? Month 4.
This is 4, yeah.
Month 4 of 12 months of Mike. We're here. We made it. It's the end of the month again, but who's keeping track? I mean, I think that's probably what it's going to end up being. I think it's always going to be like last minute at this point. So, I'll probably stop remarking on it. But we actually have a movie that I'm actually pleasantly surprised by my reaction to. Going back a few episodes now, I've said a couple times that this is the one that I'm worried about. The Austin Powers, the first one. I love this movie. When I saw it in the late 90s, early 2000s, I watched it a ton back then. I haven't watched it I feel like it's been a solid 15 years since I've watched this movie.
We had it on VHS, didn't we?
We did, yeah. That was one of our last
I remember
VHS days.
watching it a lot.
And I haven't seen it in a long time. And I have soured so much on Austin Powers as a franchise that I was genuinely scared that this was going to ruin it for me. But
I was actually dreading it. And then when I watched it, I actually really enjoyed it. There were parts of it that we'll get into that made me cringe, because it's still a Mike Myers movie.
It's still a Mike Myers movie, yeah.
But I really enjoyed it, and I remembered why I liked it so much in the 90s, and it kind of reminded me of why it was such a cultural phenomenon, because Austin Powers was a cultural phenomenon. Right. If you really think about it, it was crazy big.
Yeah, I think in some ways, maybe it's just because we're a little bit young for Wayne's World. When Wayne's World 1 came out, I was 7, and I still saw it probably around that. I didn't see it in theaters, but I saw it relatively soon after that. But I wasn't watching Saturday Night Live when I was in elementary school, So Austin Powers came 6-7 years later. And so I was very much in the zeitgeist for that. So I felt like Austin Powers, to me at least, had a bigger cultural impact.
I think I don't think that's just our view of it. I think it definitely did. Don't you think in the 90s, especially since the 90s, we kind of talked about this earlier, had the whole 60s revival thing going on.
Right.
I think it wasn't just part of our zeitgeist. I think it was part of the zeitgeist. It seemed, I mean, it had 2 movies after that came out. It had 2 sequels, I should say.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember my friend Brian, shout out to Brian, after this movie came out, he came to school for picture day. He came dressed as Austin Powers. So that's one of my favorite stories. And we'll get into this a little bit more because I feel like the Austin Powers thing is a little bit of like a monkey's paw situation, because when this movie came along, it was everything that I loved becoming mainstream. You know, I was a kind of a weird preteen. I was like 13 years old in 97 when this movie came out. And I was really into the 60s, like going back to, you know, the 60s Batman show and the Beatles movies, especially Help, to be honest, which is kind of the most Austin Powers-esque of the Beatles movies.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The Monkees TV show. You know, I was just into the 60s. And even, you know, like the early James Bond movies I was getting into around that time. So Austin Powers really felt like tailor-made. And of course, Mike Myers. Like,
yeah.
You know, the glue that held it all together. This movie felt like tailor-made for me. And so on the one hand, it's cool that like now I finally have something in common with my peers. But on the other hand, after this movie, it totally got ruined, and everything that I loved about the franchise was gradually drained away until it was nothing but an empty husk. So I have real bittersweet feelings about this movie.
Somewhat related to that, you know, like this is like Austin Powers merch, and also, you know, the leaving an empty husk and the power being drained away from it. Do you remember that Austin Powers action figure you had that had the stand? It had like a stand that if you push the button, it would say his catchphrases. It had like pointing hands, and then you could change it out, and it was a gun in the hand.
Yeah, it was like it was a Todd McFarlane action figure. It was very disturbingly lifelike, if I recall.
Yeah. So that I remember there was one time like it had been in your like around for a while. I think it was probably like a year or two old at this point. And I pushed the button one day and it just started making this horrible wait, let me do it without laughing. It didn't say the catchphrase this time. It was just like I can't do it. Basically, it was this long, sustained creaking noise. And it went on. It, like, wouldn't stop. Like, I heard it.
It was like days. Didn't we put it in the closet?
It was weeks. Because he kept doing it.
He was just saying, do I make you horny, like, really, really slowly? Like...
So I kept doing it, and so we like put it in the back of the closet. It was incredibly like concerning. So it like if you open the closet door, you could just hear. And then I think finally it like wore itself out, but it went on for a long time because I remember like it had to have been weeks later opening and you could still hear it.
Yeah, and I feel like that action figure is like a perfect metonym for the Austin Powers series. Like that story just perfectly encapsulates Gold Member.
Because you can imagine Mike Myers, like the Austin Powers character standing on a stand with his arms pointed up, big smile on his face, but all you can hear is
yeah. The first movie was Yeah Baby Yeah. Gold Member was so anyway, we'll get back into Austin Powers. I want to quickly, as always, run through some listener comments. These are all from YouTube because we've done away with any pretense of people listening to us any other way. Of course, if you do want to reach out to us, you can use YouTube. You can also, we are on social media. We are, you can comment on the website, but we're happy to read the YouTube comments. I want to actually start with an old one. This is from 2 months ago. It was on the original Wayne's World podcast, and I totally missed it. So I apologize. Callie caught it earlier today. So Tony Manuel Bernardo, you finally got your response, but I want to give you a response also on the air. He said, I have a new request for you guys. I think your Legion, which I love the idea that we have a Legion, would love it if you guys did a reaction to the VH1 reality show Supergroup with Sebastian Bach, Ted Nugent, Scott Ian from Anthrax, Jason Bonham, I'm assuming that's John Bonham's son, the pornographer Evan Seinfeld, as well as Doc McGee, infamous manager of Kiss and Motley Crue. It would make your target audience fight our 2020 blues just a bit. Well, we missed 2020, but I'm sure 2021 will be
as
it's also going to suck. So yeah. So
I actually have been wanting to watch Supergroup anyway. I didn't know Doc
this
McGee
seems
had
like
anything
something
to
you
do
would
with
know
it.
about. Right?
Oh yeah, so I know a little bit. I know that the group name that they settle on is Damnocracy. So
it's like making the band but hair metal, basically. Is that what
exactly, yeah,
Okay.
it's exactly what it is. And it sounds amazing. I've probably seen a little bit of it because VH1 would be on. I was kind of too young to sit and watch VH1 shows like that when they were on, but I would definitely appreciate them now. And also, I've been kind of like, I know we did the Motley Crue podcast, and there was a lot about Doc McGee in there. And then I recently listened to the podcast Winds of Change, which is a really, really good podcast about the Scorpions and how they may or may not be CIA agents. Really, really interesting podcast. And Doc McGee has a pretty extensive part in that,
because he wasn't the one in the dirt. They flew over to do some show in like some Eastern Bloc country, didn't they? Didn't that happen at some?
Yeah, it was Russia.
Arguably the most famous
episode
Eastern
about
Bloc
that.
country.
Yes, so there's a chapter about it in the dirt, and then if you want another angle of it, there's an episode of Wind of Change about it, which is the what was it, like the anti-drug and alcohol show that he put on, which is hilarious.
Right.
Because Motley Crue was the headliner. Yeah, really, really interesting podcast, and Doc McGee is a really bizarre person. So.
He seems like a character, even just from the like bit parts that he's played in the various biographies we've read. So yes,
I'm willing to get another angle on him from Super as well. So that's I totally
and also
see that.
just,
if we can track it down, I'm not sure if we'd be able to find those episodes. But if we can, I definitely think we should do that.
Yeah, we'll try and find it because I also really want to see Sebastian Bach and Ted Nugent interact. I'm probably going to kick myself for saying this, but that sounds hilarious to me. That sounds like a recipe for comedy.
Definitely. And let's not forget, we still have to read Sebastian Bach's autobiography.
I know we've been threatening our audience with that.
I spent $30. Right, I spent $30 on and got it signed like 3 or 4 years ago now, and I have never finished it. And because I wanted to save it for a book club podcast, and we just haven't done it yet. So we still have that waiting for us.
Well, we have this important work of going through Mike Myers' entire filmography. So
definitely more relevant, needed right
now. So a couple of more recent comments. We got a Canadian listener to weigh in on the Backstage Laminates thing. This is from Humongous on YouTube. Backstage Laminates isn't a Canadian thing as far as I know. I used to go to lots of concerts. It seems to be its industry jargon. Okay, so I will admit I'm hyper conscious of I'm trying to find every instance of Mike Myers' characters being inappropriately Canadian. So sometimes I think I was a little overzealous there, so I appreciate you clearing that up. Humongous also said about Wayne's World 1, I think talking about the, we were talking about all of the 70s pop culture references and 60s pop culture references. He said being a teenager in the 90s, it seemed like all of the people who were young in the 60s were just waiting for the 90s because that's when their kids were going to be young like they were, and that let them relive their youth. Now all those old hippie dipshits just can't let young people enjoy their youth because they had so much fun both times. I think that's a solid theory. Humongous also said that he loves So I Married an Axe Murderer. I hope we didn't upset him too much with our review of that. And he said we have to do another mailbag, which we absolutely do. I mean, we've been using some of them up for this series, but I feel like we've got some old ones. We've been getting comments on our KISS stuff. Not all of them.
Have we still been? I know we got like 1 or 2, but
yeah, not all of them have been abusive. Actually, shockingly, I think the abusive ones are now in the minority. But I think there's probably still a couple of gems that we've skipped over. So at some point when we can actually both be in the same room, we'll do a mailbag episode. So Marty White is back. He said on our Wayne's World 2, talking about Mike Myers wanting Fellini to direct. He said Myers thinks his work puts him in the company of Fellini, just like Star Grandpa thinks Lick It Up put him in the company of Beethoven.
That was definitely one of my favorite parts of Paul Stanley's biography when he was comparing his Lick It Up, probably I was about to say probably the stupidest KISS song, but that has a lot of competition. But yeah, it was literally
literally a real life version of the "Lick My Love Pump" scene in Spinal Tap. Like, it's incredible. You couldn't have written a funnier transition than that. So yeah, thank you everyone who commented. Like I said, it's always very exciting to see that people are actually listening to this. And now we're going to talk about Austin Powers, and we're actually, I think, going to be mostly complimentary about it. So to start, a little background. This is, as usual, largely from Wikipedia with a few additions from a Hollywood Reporter oral history that came out on the 20th anniversary of the movie in 2017. So Austin Powers, the seed of this idea came about during Mike Myers' hiatus from Saturday Night Live. He left the show in 1995 and then took basically a year off from performing. And during that time, he started a band, one of those weird, like, celebrity supergroups, like the band Stephen King is in, like Damnocracy. Yeah, exactly. The band was called Ming T, and he formed it with Susanna Hoffs from the Bangles, who performed under the very Austin Powersian name of Jillian Shagwell. Wasn't Felicity Shagwell was that Heather Graham in the second movie? Felicity Shagwell seems.
Don't know. No, because I blocked the second movie out, so that's all you.
Well, we'll confirm that next month, because I think that's our next movie. But anyway, Susanna Hoff's alter ego was Jillian Shagwell. They all had, like 60s alter egos for this band. Matthew Sweet, the power pop songwriter, was Sid Belvedere, a veteran of this podcast, or being talked about on this podcast. Much Music VJ Christopher Ward, aka Wayne's cousin, was also in the band as Trevor Egberth, I guess. Somebody from England could probably pronounce that correctly. But anyway, Austin Powers was, of course, Mike Myers' character. So he invented this character, like probably, the source of much of his fortune and success, for a goofy, like, novelty rock band that he formed while he was on break from Saturday Night Live. And his then wife encouraged him to write a film around this character. A Rolling Stone article, which I actually remember having this magazine. It was when me and my friend Brian, who dressed as Austin Powers on Picture Day, and my mom and his mom went to London, England for like a couple of weeks. And I remember Mike as Austin was on the cover, and then you turned the outer cover, and there was another cover which was Ricky Martin. So obviously this was 1999. And the cover story, the tagline of the cover story describes Mike Myers as the Marlon Brando of comedy. So again, different times. But it said that the character of Austin Powers, he said in this interview, came to him when he was hearing the song "The Look of Love," performed by Dusty Springfield, written by Burt Bacharach, who appears in Austin Powers.
The look of love is in your eyes, a look your smile can't disguise. The look of love, it's saying so much more than just words could ever say. And what my heart has heard, well, it takes my breath away. I can hardly wait to hold you, feel my arms around you. How long I have waited just to love you. Now that I've found you, you've got the look of love.
He called it the national anthem of libido, and it made him think, where have all the swingers gone? So he fell into this character that he then used for his band. Other elements of the inspiration for the movie date back to 1991, which we talked about in our Wayne's World podcast. That was when Mike's father died, who was a British immigrant. He said, after my dad died in 1991, I was taking stock of his influence on me as a person and his influence on me with comedy in general. So Austin Powers was a tribute to my father, who introduced me to James Bond, Peter Sellers, the Beatles, the Goodies, Peter Cook, and Dudley Moore. This kind of brings up, when I was watching this movie, I was like, I feel like I probably might have more personal affection for the Wayne's World movies, mostly because they haven't been ruined by 2 really bad sequels. But I think objectively, Austin Powers to me feels like Mike Myers' magnum opus. Like it feels like this really personal film. Everything about it is so specific. Everything about it is so clearly rooted in his interests and his influences. Because, you know, even like as we observe, so many of the greatest parts of Wayne's World were from Dana Carvey. Austin Powers 1 is like undiluted Mike Myers, and it's actually good. It's like, so this is like really his artistic peak, I think.
I agree with that.
It's all downhill from here.
I think it is an artistic peak. It's a pretty good, just like goofy late 90s comedy. It works, and I think it looks really cool. I was actually thinking the whole time I was watching it, I really like how this looks. Like it aged well for me. You know, like not, I wouldn't stand up against like modern films, but in terms of like aging well as like it's enjoyable to watch as a late 90s comedy. Like it's fun to look at.
Yeah, I was super impressed by the production design. I wasn't alive in the 60s, but I was like a total 60s file, you know, Anglophile. And it looks like you can tell that they really studied old movies like like Flint's and, you know, the Beatles movies. And it looked like the scenes of swinging London looked so real. The clothes Austin Powers wears, as ridiculous as they are, feel like that kind of Carnaby Street mod kind of fashion.
I really love the beginning part that is like it takes place in the 60s before they, you know, get cryogenically frozen, and the rest happens in the 90s. Like the part that's supposed to take place in the 60s, it looks kind of like a Disney World version of the 60s.
Right.
But it's still like the way that the whole movie looks, it's like a really good time capsule for how the 90s view of the 60s was. I don't know if I'm articulating that well enough, but it like reminds me a little bit of like the Delight's first album, that whole aesthetic and everything. Or like when Blow Up Chairs came back. I remember when Mom went to London and she brought me back, it was like a clear blow up chair with pink flowers on it that looked like it was supposed to be like 60s patterns.
Right.
Stuff like that like I remember. And at the time, you know, I was a kid, so I was just like, this is just how things look. I didn't think about it as like a like moment in pop culture like I do now, where looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, there was totally a 60s thing going on in the 90s. And it was like, super interesting, and the way that the 90s interpreted the 60s looks pretty accurate to how the 60s were, but it also looks very 90s, and I appreciated that while I was watching Austin Powers.
Yeah, it feels distinct, and yeah, it reminds me of like English music magazines and stuff that I read at the time. There's like 2 layers of nostalgia in this movie. You know, there's the late 90s version of the 60s and then the actual 60s. A lot of the credit, especially for the production design, would have to go to the director of the film, Jay Roach, who was actually, he's married to Susanna Hoffs from the Bangles. And Mike Myers collaborated in this movie with him from the start. He said he wrote the bones of the script in 2 weeks. And then he showed it to Jay Roach, and he gave them a bunch of notes, and he said everything he said made it better. He said, this is from the oral history. He said, Jay and I would sit around and think, what if Austin Powers were based on an obscure British comic book that we were turning into a movie? Which is, I almost wish that they had then made that comic book as if it were the source of the
would have been really cool.
So they kind of worked up this idea together. This was an independent film. New Line Cinema picked it up, and I think at first apparently they weren't super convinced by Jay Roach being the director. According to Mike, he had only produced an independent movie about Hitler at that point, so that's an interesting path to Austin Powers. But he ended up getting the job just kind of on the strength of his ideas and the concept, and I think he did a good job. Like I have not watched a lot of Jay Roach films. Like after Austin Powers, I know he did some like TV movies for HBO that were like the one with Sarah Palin, or the one about Sarah Palin's not in it, but the one about Sarah Palin, the Recount movie, and a couple of other, you know, so he's done some stuff that has gotten claimed. He also did the Meet the Parents franchise. So, you know, peaks and valleys for sure. And he did all 3 Austin Powers. And I think we all know at this point how I feel about Austin Powers 2 and 3.
Well, I feel like that the Meet the Parents kind of runs the same course, where it's like the first movie is good and you know, has critical acclaim, and then the next 2 are flops, in my opinion.
So Jay Roach is good at taking a good idea and executing it and then running it into the ground. That's his talent as a director. One thing I thought was interesting, this was a random thing I found on Wikipedia. Apparently, Mike wanted Jim Carrey to play Dr. Evil initially, but Jim Carrey had to turn the part down because of scheduling conflicts with Liar Liar. There's a part of me, because I was also a Jim Carrey fan when I was like a preteen, so there's a part of me that would be interested in seeing this alternate universe Austin Powers with Jim Carrey as Dr. Evil. But I also like can't imagine it's so much better as a dual role, I think.
Yeah.
And we know how skeptical I am about Mike Myers playing multiple characters in one movie. But this is one of the few cases where I think it's justified. Of course, in the second movie,
and it's only two.
Add additional characters.
Right, like it's only two, and it both characters are funny, so it works. And then, I mean, we'll get more into this when we actually watch these, but like adding all of the other ones is just, it gets to be too much.
I was talking to my girlfriend about this because she watched Austin Powers with me, and she, I don't think ever saw Goldmember. And I was talking to her about how the series declined. And again, we'll get to this, but I was telling her like how ridiculous the character of Goldmember is, because the decline is so funny. Because like Austin Powers and Dr. Evil have a lot of catchphrases, but they're like really, especially Dr. Evil, they're like these really fully formed characters. Dr. Evil has this ridiculous backstory that he gets into in this movie in the group therapy scene. You know, they're so crafted. And then it's like Fat Bastard is an obese Scottish man who wants to eat people, you know, so it's like, okay, well, this is obviously you didn't spend as much time on this. And then Goldmember is literally just a Dutch guy, and his two catchphrases are, "I'm Dutch, isn't that weird?" and "I love gold."
He also has some like skin condition that he like peels his skin off and saves it. Let's not forget that.
Oh, I forgot about that.
But
yeah, just purely.
Basically, he's me because he peels his skin off and he loves gold.
That's gold. Purely on the strength of the catchphrases, it's like Mike Myers got hit on the head in the early 2000s.
Well, and then let's not forget the moly part.
Yeah.
The stupid.
So it'll be interesting to watch as our good feelings about this franchise gradually sour. Another little tidbit from the oral history: the movie initially got an R rating specifically because of the scene where they're naked and there's suggestive objects in the foreground covering their private parts, especially the scene where Elizabeth Hurley is biting the sausage protruding from his penis area. They said the only thing they asked us to do in the final cut, which was kind of surprising to me, was they thought there was too much butt cheek on Mike when he got thawed out. So I went for a slightly more profile version.
Yeah.
Where was the fucking MPAA when So I Married an Axe Murderer was being approved? Because that was a lot more butt cheek. Was there some kind of moral panic between 1993 and 1997? Was there a Janet Jackson style?
They were like, never again. This could never happen again. That was the moral panic.
It's specifically Mike Myers' ass earns you an R rating from 1990 forward. Yeah. I did notice that though in the unfreezing scene. I was like, well, there's Mike Myers' ass again. Like we can't get away from it. And then there's later a scene where he strips down to his briefs. So like we are at this point 4 for 4 in Mike Myers at least in his briefs, if not fully nude from the waist down. So the film was not the success that Wayne's World 1 was, but it also wasn't quite the failure that Wayne's World 2 and So I Married an Axe Murderer especially were.
I'm surprised. Yeah. It seems like it would, I don't know, just the way I remember it, like to this day, people seem to quote and like remember Austin Powers more so than Wayne's World. And again, I guess maybe that's because it's our generation, but it doesn't seem that way. I don't know, but whatever.
Yeah, I think it's because of video. So Jay Roach said that it opened internationally on the weekend Princess Diana died, and there was no one in the world in the mood for Americans mocking English people, which I actually thought was funny because when I was watching it, there was that scene where I think he said something. Oh, it was Dr. Evil.
As you know, the royal family of Britain are the wealthiest landowners in the world. Either the royal family pays us an exorbitant amount of money, or we make it seem that Prince Charles has had an affair outside of marriage and therefore would have to divorce.
Prince Charles did have an affair. He admitted it, and they are now divorced.
Right, okay, people, you have to tell me these things, all right? I've been frozen for 30 years, okay? Throw me a frickin' bone here. I'm the boss. Need the info. Okay, no problem.
And I was like, when did Diana die? Because like it must have been right around that time. And in fact, it was the weekend that the movie was released. So he said that that reference was cut from the UK version of the movie. But it is, at least I watched it on HBO Max. It was still on there. So
yeah, I watched it on Amazon Prime and it was on there. So.
But yeah, so in terms of the like debut box office, it was 9.5 million against a budget of 16.5 million. So, not great opening weekend, but ultimately the home video made up for that. And that's like true to my experience. But I mean, I give my experience with a grain of salt because I was definitely too young to see Austin Powers in the theater, at least based on
didn't
what.
Mom and Dad see it? I thought
they might have. And then they might have been like, Zach would like this,
yeah.
which, accurate. But so I definitely saw it on video. The second one was the first one that I saw in theaters. So I that was probably something a lot of people experienced, whether it was because like me, they were maybe like right on the cusp of being old enough for it, or, just they missed it in the initial theatrical run. And it was one of those, I know it happened with Office Space and just a lot of other movies at that like early DVD era where it didn't really do much in video and then it became this cult movie at home, which is, it's interesting to think about Austin Powers as a cult movie, but I feel like this first one still feels that way.
Yeah, and I honestly,
you don't have the soundtrack with
stayed.
Madonna and Lenny Kravitz.
I wish it had stayed a cult movie, honestly.
I do too. It was so much better.
One so successful, and then when it became a phenomenon, that's
and
what made it terrible.
I feel like the jokes got dumber and dumber, like in an effort to be more middle of the road.
The general public are fucking stupid, especially Americans. So
I thought this was an interesting quote from a review. This is from Andrew Johnson, a critic for Time Out New York. He said, "The film's greatest asset is its gentle tone. Rejecting the smug cynicism of Naked Gun style parodies, it never loses the earnest naivete of the psychedelic era." And I felt like that was really true, especially there's like a warmth to it, which is kind of interesting because we previously discussed Wayne's World being like really cold and and sort of, a little dark when you kind of go beneath the surface. But Austin Powers feels affectionate toward the character at all times, even when he is this like ridiculous relic of like a more sexist era. He gets a little bit of genuine drama when there's that like sequence in Las Vegas where he's like writing down everybody who died at the end of the 60s and stuff like that. There's an interesting tone where it's like making fun of the 60s, but also sort of glorifying the 60s at the same time. And, there's pros and cons to that. Like, I definitely do think the 90s was a time when the 60s was really held up as this like golden era, and there's a little bit of that in Austin Powers. But I think it also just makes it a pleasant movie to watch because you're not like, oh, it's just they're just like shitting on this stuff, and especially because Mike Myers was such a fan of the things that they were making fun of. I think that's part of what makes it fun.
Yeah, I definitely got that too. And it made me actually like I want to watch it again, like because I haven't seen it in so long. Because like what you were saying, like the sequels just kind of soured the entire franchise for me. But it reminded me of why I liked that so much when I was a kid, and it like I was probably too young to have even watched it, but like I watched it with our parents, which is funny. But yeah, like it reminded me of like that time, and I like parodies like that aren't, even when they're making fun of stuff, they're not like overly edgy, and they seem to have a warmth about the source material that they're making fun of, like what you were saying, kind of like Yacht Rock in a way, like the series Yacht Rock. Like I like when people can take things that they love and like make fun of it instead of just people kind of like being dark all the time, even though I
do think it's similar to the Yacht Rock series in that it's fully conscious of how absurd Austin Powers is, but it also revels in that character and that era and the and not just Austin Powers, but also like the stuff that it's based on. Like the James Bond movies are fucking ridiculous. I've been watching the Sean Connery James Bond movies partly because I just watched Austin Powers, so it put me in the mood for those, and partly because I have this like Pavlovian thing where because Thanksgiving and Christmas are the times when cable stations do James Bond marathons. Like those holiday weekends make me want to watch James Bond movies. So I've been watching them, and they're like stupid and extremely sexist. Like I think at least two out of the first four movies, Sean Connery slaps a woman on the butt as she walks away. He literally slaps a couple of women like in anger. Like they're like wildly sexist movies.
And I guess that's another thing that makes like the tone of this movie interesting too, is because like it is kind of sexist. Like Elizabeth Hurley's character is, she starts out kind of being repulsed by Austin Powers, right. And all of a sudden she's like, they're married, basically.
Yeah, like complete suspension of disbelief. And there's like that scene where her mom, Mrs. Kensington, is telling her like how irresistible he is. And it's like, where? Like, yeah, she says he's witty. It's like, what about do I make you horny is witty? Like,
right, exactly. But that works for me more than other like stupid comedies of that era, because the late 90s and early 2000s had a lot of extremely sexist comedies. Like that was basically comedy, and that era was just like being extremely sexist and horrible and ableist. But this one works for me because the source material was sexist, so they're riffing on that. So it like for that reason it works for me more than like whatever some Rob Schneider film.
Right. And it kind of like, it kind of makes it a little bit of a critique of James Bond, because, in some ways, actually in a lot of ways, Austin Powers is less of a chauvinist than James Bond is. He's like more progressive. So we got to, of course, do our metrics. Minutes to Mike. It just loses to Wayne's World 2. So in Wayne's World 2, we were 38 seconds before we heard Mike Myers' voice. In Austin Powers, it's 39 seconds we hear his voice. Then at the 40-second mark, we see his hand. Then at the 43-second mark, we see the back of his head. And then finally at the 1 minute, 41-second mark, we see the face. So there's an interesting there's an interesting like rollout, like a gradual rollout of Mike Myers. It's not, this is a movie that doesn't just give you Mike right away. You kind of have to watch it unfold. But if you're here for his voice, you only have to wait 1 second longer than Wayne's World 2. So pretty respectable, I would say. And even for the face, that is still much better than So I Married an Axe Murderer, which still takes our record for the most minutes to Mike at 3 minutes, 18 seconds. That's like over twice the amount of time as Austin Powers.
Well, the good thing about this too is that there's like two plots, kind of. There's the Dr. Evil plot and the Mike Myers plot. Obviously they're intertwined, but they're usually, even when you split between them, you're still going to get Mike in some form.
Exactly. And that really shows in the Mike proof, because we're looking at, this is, if you drank this, you would be dead. The Mike content. The Mike content is through the roof. We're looking at 186 to 234 Mike proof. Like honestly, this will be the second and third Austin Powers at least will beat this, because we have so many Mikes in play. But the fact that there's several scenes here where both Dr. Evil and Austin Powers are sharing a scene, and then also there's just barely any scenes without Mike Myers in them. Basically, we've got the scene where Dr. Evil's spaceship comes back after the 60s intro. They're just talking about it. It's like the military, the air traffic control guys. And then is that it? Yeah, that's it. That's the only scene without Mike Myers in it. There's individual shots. Like if I really wanted to get like constructivist about this, I could have gone through and counted the shots. But in terms of like scenes, that's really just the one. And other than that, you're guaranteed to have at least one Mike Myers in every scene. So in quality and quantity, this may be the most Mike Myers movie, at least to date. I also want to, we haven't really talked about this as much because So I Married an Axe Murderer wasn't really that much of a catchphrase movie. Like they tried to do, the best thing they came up with was hello. So it was not a great catchphrase movie. And then Wayne's World 2, had a bunch of catchphrases, but they were all the same as the first Wayne's World. This one, obviously, this wins. This wins the catchphrase contest to date. I counted 22, and I was probably being fairly conservative, because for example, I didn't count "Yeah Baby" and "Baby Yeah" as separate.
I feel like
any combination of "Yeah" and "Baby" is one. Obviously, "Oh Behave." I feel like Dr. Evil's pinky thing is a catchphrase, even though it's nonverbal, because people definitely did it.
It's like ASL catchphrase.
I mean, there's just a bunch. I'm not going to run through all of them, but and I just remember this movie being quoted constantly, ad nauseum. And I also remember there were lines in this movie. Again, I haven't watched this movie for a solid 15 years. And there were several lines that I could have recited by heart because I think I had WAV files of them when I was a teenager. It wasn't even from memory of the movie. It was from memory of the WAV files on my computer, which is an embarrassing thing to recall. But I don't think I was alone. This was a popular soundboard movie, I think. So yeah, I think we can kind of jump in and talk about it. We start with Dr. Evil giving his speech. I think a few things about Dr. Evil. One thing is, obviously he's based on the classic James Bond villains. He's like a mix of Dr. No with the gray Nehru jacket and Blofeld with the cat, the fluffy white cat who later loses its fur, and then the scarred, bald. Apparently, Austin. I'm sorry. He's such a method actor. Mike Myers actually shaved his head to play Dr. Evil. It's not a bald cap, so that's you can't say he's not dedicated. One thing I like about him, again, because I latch onto the Canadian thing. I like the fact that he, most James Bond villains are German or Russian or some, nondescript Eastern European, one of the menacing ethnicities. And Dr. Evil, I think, may be the only Canadian supervillain of all time. I don't have any evidence for this, but he's the only one that comes to mind. Certainly, he's supposedly also modeled on Lorne Michaels, the Saturday Night Live producer. Specifically, I have to say, because we like to give credit to Dana Carvey on this podcast. Dana Carvey apparently nursed a grievance for several years that Mike Myers used his Lorne Michaels impersonation to create Dr. Evil. So I just have to give Dana some credit for that. But yeah, so I felt like this opening scene, it's such a solid parody of that classic James Bond. All of these goofy henchmen, they all have gimmicks. A bunch of them just get executed. You never see them again. And then Will Ferrell as Mustafa
in brown face.
Yeah, in brown face. He does that whole. It's a very Monty Python scene. I feel it kind of the dead guy on the plague cart where they guy on the plague cart and he keeps saying I'm not dead and then they club him. It's basically the exact same thing as Mustafa. And they just took that and put it in James Bond world.
Silence! Let this be a reminder to you all that this organization will not tolerate failure. Gentlemen, let's get down to business. We've got a lot of work to do.
Someone help me! I'm still alive, only I'm very badly burned.
Some of you I know, some of you I'm meeting for the first time.
Hello there. Anyone? Can someone call an ambulance? I'm in quite a lot of pain.
Okay, you've all been gathered here to form my evil cabinet. Excuse me. Yes, he's down there. Is he dead? No, not dead. No, burnt. Badly. So I can take care of it possibly with a gun? Yes. Kill him. Right.
If somebody can open the retrieval hatch down here, I can get out. See, I designed this device myself. Oh, hi. Good. I'm glad you found me. Listen, I'm very badly burned, so if you could just... You shot me!
Okay, moving on.
You shot me right in the arm! Why did...
I feel like Will Ferrell, this was pretty early in his career, but it's an extremely Will Ferrell performance.
Yeah, I never even realized until this watch that was Will Ferrell. Just because
Yeah.
the last time I watched it, I was too young to really like know or care about Will Ferrell, and it was before Will Ferrell was really, Will Ferrell.
Right.
So I just never really thought about it, and then this time I was like, oh, that's Will Ferrell in brown face and a fez.
And then we have the scene that we were talking about. Like this is taking place back in the 60s. And then it cuts to Austin Powers. They do the dance sequence to Soul Bossa Nova by Quincy Jones, which is, if you don't know what Soul Bossa Nova is, it's the Austin Powers song. Like that, I feel like that's how most people know it.
This part really
nowadays.
stuck out to me. I'd never really paid attention to it before, but this part, I think this is where most of my laughs came from, was this opening part with the dancing. I like when he disappears behind the corner and then he comes out with like a baton and he's leading the band. It was like really funny for me this time.
One thing I think I noticed is that I feel like Mike Myers got better at physical comedy between this and Wayne's World. Like there's the scene where he does the behind the couch thing later on. It's much smoother. Like he does.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know if he was seeing a personal trainer or what, but it's, or maybe he's so method that he's like, well, Wayne Campbell would just do a kind of a mediocre disappearing behind the couch, but Austin Powers would really get into it. So I got to do that much better. But yeah, I feel like his physical comedy was really good in this movie. This is the scene that I was kind of talking about. I think they did a really good job at like aping that 60s aesthetic in like a lot of different ways. Like he's snapping the photos. It's like the movie Blow Up. Obviously there's this shot where he's running away from a bunch of girls, which is very Hard Day's Night. And then like there's specific references to the Our Man Flint series. I think the sound that Basil Exposition's video phone makes when he calls is the exact sound from Our Man Flint and In Like Flint.
Yeah, I remember reading that. It is.
Yeah. I also just think Basil Exposition, like the name, is one of the best jokes in Austin Powers because he's literally just a character who gives exposition. And the actor, Michael York, he's just really funny in that role. I love the scene where Austin Powers punches his mother in the face.
Austin, I'd like you to meet somebody. This is my mother, Mrs. Exposition.
How do you do?
Austin! My God, man, what have you done?
That's not your mother, it's a man, baby!
Yeah! Yeah! Come on! Why won't this wig come off? Austin!
Yeah, hold on one second.
No, my mother! Oh, mother. Mother, are you all right?
What? Austin, have you gone mad?
No.
You have a lot of explaining to do.
I'm sorry, Basil, I thought she was a man.
Damn it, man, you're talking about my mother.
Well, you have to admit, she is rather mannish.
Austin!
Well, no offense, but if that is a woman, it does look like she was beaten with an ugly stick.
What?
That, ironically, is one of the parts that I remember it being funny when I was a kid, and it just bothered me this time.
It is pretty. It's like it's so vicious.
Yeah, it's like he punches her and then he
tries to pull off her hair.
Pulls off her hair, and then he keeps saying that she's mannish, which like that doesn't sit well with me anymore. But I remember thinking it was really funny. But that was like specifically one of the parts that I watched this time and was like, ugh, that didn't age well.
I mean, it did. And it happens twice. the first time it happens in the swinging shindig that Austin shows up at, and where he confronts, and it actually is a man.
That one is funny because again, it's the stunt double thing where he punches a woman, which
it's like
I
a
mean,
beautiful woman, and then once her comes off, it's a dude.
Yeah, and that for me again, that was more so like a making fun of the James Bond's movie. So that one worked for me. And then when they show her again, it's very clearly like they changed her to a man. Like it was a different actor. So that one worked for me. Punching an older woman and saying that she looks like a man didn't really work for me, but to each their own, I guess.
I don't fully understand. I don't think we're really meant to understand. It's just like the plot is moving, but Dr. Evil escapes on a spaceship. And then Austin, I guess, because he knows Dr. Evil is going to come back, he volunteers to have himself cryogenically frozen.
Well, they established this. This is one of the great ways of telling a story where they tell instead of show.
Right. Powers volunteered to have himself frozen in case Dr. Evil should ever return.
Well, I hope your boy's up to it.
So they explain it.
Yeah, they do. I think one of the reasons why I like this movie is because I have one of my favorite hackneyed comedy plots is a fish out of water comedy. Like I feel like I'm one of the only people I know who really likes the first Thor movie because it's basically a cheesy fish out of water comedy in the Marvel universe, which is so stupid. So the whole point of this movie is that he's from the 60s. He was cryogenically frozen in 1967, and then they unthaw him in 1997. So we see
because you get Austin Powers is the fish out of water, but also Dr. Evil is the fish out of water too, because he at first wants to ask the ransom sum of a really low amount of money, low due to inflation of the 90s, and so you kind of get to see both of them deal with that, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's a rare example of there being two fish.
Yeah.
So Dr. Evil's the spaceship comes back. They unfreeze Austin Powers. This is kind of the first appearance of a bathroom humor in the film and series. It still gets a laugh out of me when he keeps peeing.
Stage 5. Evacuation beginning. Evacuation complete. Evacuation complete. Complete. Evacuation complete.
It's a less insultingly stupid bathroom gag than we get later in the series. The joke is just that he's peeing for a long time.
Yeah, because you pee after you wake up. Everyone can relate to it. Unlike eating feces. Scarcely anyone can relate to that, I hope.
This is also the scene where we see Mike Myers' ass again. One thing I made note of is that he's in the cryogenically frozen celebrities room, and Vanilla Ice is one of the other celebrities.
Yeah.
I really I think we already talked about this in an earlier podcast, but the scene with Mike Myers' old comedy partner, Neil Malarkey, where he's giving him back his personal effects.
Danger Powers Personal Effects.
Actually, my name is Austin Powers.
It says here, name Danger Powers.
No. Danger's my middle name.
Okay, Austin Danger Powers. One blue crushed velvet suit.
Hey, all right.
One frilly lace cravat.
There it is.
One silver medallion with male symbol. One pair of Italian boots.
Buongiorno, boys.
One vinyl record album, Burt Bacharach Plays His Hits.
Hey, bro. Yeah.
One Swedish-made penis enlarger pump.
That's not mine.
One credit card receipt for Swedish-made penis enlarger. signed by Austin Powers.
I'm telling you, baby, that's not mine.
One warranty card for Swedish-made penis enlarger pump, filled out by Austin Powers.
I don't even know what this is. This sort of thing ain't my bag, baby.
One book, Swedish-made penis enlarger pumps and me. This sort of thing is my bag, baby, by Austin Powers.
A very thick volume about about the penis enlarger. Like, it's so stupid.
I like the cover of it too.
Yeah. Like who gave him this book deal? Like who was his editor? Who allowed the book to be clearly well over 300 pages? Like it's not a shit book.
Well, you read Crazy from the Heat, and that was what, like 500 pages or something?
That's true.
Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense in that universe, though, because especially like the whole thing with Austin Powers is that he's beloved. Like,
right.
He was probably able to do whatever the fuck he wants.
Yeah.
He wants to write a book about a Swedish penis enlarger. Who's gonna stop him?
This is also where they introduce Austin Powers to Elizabeth Hurley's character, who is the daughter of his former. That's another like reference from the 60s part that Mrs. Kensington is obviously Emma Peel from the Avengers. And then she has this daughter who's played by Elizabeth Hurley, who is really, she's fun. I wonder what happened, like why she was only in the first scene of the second movie. And we'll talk about this, but I wonder why they wrote her out. I imagine it's probably because they were just like, well, a married Austin Powers doesn't make sense. And they decided to make the characters get married in this movie. Again, kind of straining the boundaries of believability and chemistry. I think she was way better as a sidekick than Heather Graham was in the second one, and like worlds better than Beyonce was in the third one. So, at the beginning, it's like her dynamic is to, chastise Austin Powers for his retroactive thoughts about especially gender. They're on the jet, and that's the famous "Do I make you horny?" scene.
Let me ask you a question, and be honest. Do I make you horny? Randy? Do I make you horny, baby? Yeah, do I?
God, I hope this is part of the unfreezing process.
Oh, Terminus! Oh, look at that! Oh, Terminus! Oh, I fell over! Oh, I fell over again!
Ow!
Oh.
Mr. Powers! I will never have sex with you, ever. If you were the last man on Earth and I was the last woman on Earth, and the future of the human race depended on our having sex simply for procreation, I still would not have sex with you.
What's your point, Vanessa?
Just on the general issue of Austin Powers' horniness, we've been critical in the past of moments in these movies where we're kind of forced to reckon with the idea of Mike Myers as a sexual being. And I would say, for some reason, I don't know why, it doesn't bother me that Austin Powers fucks. It bothers me quite a bit that Wayne fucks, and it bothers me almost to a movie ruining extent that Charlie from So I Married an Axe Murderer fucks. Like, so,
almost to a movie ruining? I would say that was one of the main things that, well, no, never mind. It's not. I would say the only reason that isn't movie ruining is because so many other things ruined the movie before that.
Yeah. For some reason, I find Austin Powers' sexuality less offensive than the other Mike Myers characters. It's not like I have a problem with him. It's the whole like revolving bed and stuff is funny, but I just feel like that whole aspect is kind of like the least interesting part of Austin Powers to me. The parts I like are the parodies of the Bond movies and the whole family drama with Dr. Evil and his son, and just like stuff like that, and the fish out of water stuff. That whole, the like catchphrasey character, basically the thing that inspired Mike Myers to make Austin Powers, is the part that I'm kind of like least interested in.
We kind of mentioned this before, but those parts work better in Austin Powers than they do in any other Mike Myers movie. Like, this feels like the most fully fledged way of representing Mike Myers' whole brand of comedy than any of his other movies ever.
Yeah,
like, ever. Any of his other movies before or after.
Because even though I was laughing at the idea that Austin Powers is witty and charming, like Mrs. Kensington says, he's still like, I see him being more appealing than Charlie and So I Married an Ex-Murderer, who was just like constantly making jokes, and it was like, just fucking relax for a second,
right?
You know,
and you know what like about Austin Powers, and this kind of goes in with it being like warmer too, is like the Austin Powers character is just kind of like, he's an example of like dumb, sexist, like a James Bond character, but he's like James Bond with a closed head injury. Like he's so like, or like James Bond's like dumb cousin or something. Like he's so like kind of stupid and not really like, kind of like childlike, but he also like fucks and is extremely horny and like it's for some reason irresistible to women, but you don't really see that in his character so much. You just see kind of like a really like childlike is really the only way I can describe it. He's like a really
he's sort of like too
figure.
stupid to be offensive,
right?
And then also I will say there's something progressive about the fact that he's not saying you make me horny. He's saying, do I make you horny?
He's asking, but he's
putting the woman's needs first.
After he says that, he also does like use the plane turbulence as an excuse to get on top of her and keep falling on her and do the stupid, oh, I'm falling over joke.
Which was also in Wayne's World 2.
Yeah. So there's that. But he does not sleep with her when she's
That's
drunk.
true. I feel like James Bond absolutely would have. But Austin Powers, this is where much like Prince in Graffiti Bridge, he's a saint because he does not date rape Elizabeth Hurley. So that's when we know that he's a good guy. I was mentioning Dr. Evil and his son. That's when he shows up. He's played by Seth Green. This runs through all of the movies, and I feel like there was probably some funny stuff in the second one with Mini-Me and Scott being jealous of Mini-Me. Like just the idea of that is funny, but I feel like the execution, again, we'll get there, but I think they fumbled it in the execution. But here with just the two of them, I read something in the oral history. Seth Green said that he played all of his scenes as Scott as if he was in a Lifetime movie. So he played it completely straight. So I think that's kind of what makes it funny, is that he is like a character from a drama who's genuinely upset that his dad has been gone for his whole life and now is coming back into his life. And also he's a James Bond villain. Like it's such a ridiculous premise, but he plays it totally naturalistically. I guess the other thing to note about this is that Dr. Evil's henchwoman, Frau Farbissina, created Scott through artificial insemination.
Remember when we froze your semen? You said if it didn't look like you were coming back, we should try to make you a son so that a part of you could live forever.
Oh, sure.
Well, after a couple of years, we got a little impatient. Dr. Evil, I want you to meet your son.
My son?
Yeah. Scott!
Hello, Scott.
Hi.
I'm your father, Dr. Evil.
I haven't seen you my whole life, and now you come back and just expect a relationship? I hate you.
What? Could I have a hug?
No.
Give me a hug.
No way.
Come here.
I'm not coming over there.
Let's go.
Forget it.
Pronto.
What are you doing?
I'm with it. I'm hip. Well, don't look at me like I'm frickin' Frankenstein. Give your father a hug.
Hey,
don't
touch me.
Hug. Hug.
Get away from me, you lazy-eyed psycho.
This probably isn't as funny as I think it is, but I do like, there's a really subtle part where she calls Dr. Evil Hair Doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Doctor.
That always made me laugh. Yeah, exactly. It's like stuff like that that I think makes this movie feel a little a little bit smarter than you expect it to be, and a little more of like a cult movie rather than like a big tentpole, like a Rob Schneider comedy, like you mentioned earlier. Then we have they're in Las Vegas to investigate the Front Corporation for Dr. Evil, which Robert Wagner as number 2 runs. It's called VirtueCon. And I guess it's like a multimedia conglomerate. I think this is the scene with the Tom Arnold cameo. Well, there's a few things here. There's a few things I like. I think one of the funniest.
I didn't register that as Tom Arnold until just now. Like it never struck me as being Tom Arnold. I don't recognize him without his glasses.
That's like 60% of what's funny about it. I feel like.
Yeah, well now it's funny.
Howdy. That is one crazy getup you got there, fella.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you in the show?
No, actually, I'm English.
But otherwise, it's just stupid bathroom
Poop joke. Yeah, it's like like whatever. Again, it's not as bad as Austin drinking fat bastard shit in the second movie, but I'm not going to highlight it as one of my favorite scenes. One of my favorite fish out of water lines is where he devises the names.
Allow myself to introduce myself. My name is Richie Cunningham, and this is my wife, Oprah.
My name is number 2. This is my Italian confidential secretary. Her name is Alata. Alata Vagina.
Come again?
A lot of vagina.
I'm sorry, I'm just not getting it. It sounded like you said your name was a lot of, Never mind.
Which are, of course, 2 names that, sound bizarre after 1967. I'm not sure where he would have heard the name Oprah before 1967, but whatever. And then, we have more of the James Bond parody. The character, a lot of vagina, is obviously a riff on Pussy Galore from Goldfinger. This got really dumb later in the movies, again, because apparently Mike Myers suffered a closed head injury sometime around the turn of the century. But I remember the one that really just like made me cringe, full body cringe, was in Goldmember, where he meets 2 Asian twins named Fuku and Fuki.
And that's what I'm talking about. That's like just
like middle school level
just
racist.
like like plebeian, like 2000s, late 90s, dumb, like frat boy dude comedy. Like that was the comedy that was out then. And I feel like Austin Powers, the first Austin Powers, is better than that, and then they just kind of sunk to that.
Exactly.
I'm sure we'll get back to that when we watch the movie, but it's a disappointment.
But and in contrast, like a lot of vagina it's a sophomoric like sexual joke, but it's also like it's kind of demonstrating how stupid a name Pussy Galore is. Because it's like a literal, almost like a direct translation of Pussy Galore. It's just like it's so like self-evidently dumb that it's funny. And I think that's what he was going for with Fook You and Fook Me, but he missed the mark by a lot. This is also, you mentioned, this is where Dr. Evil reveals his plan. He's going to ransom the world for $1 million, which I don't actually think was like, not to be, the joke police. I don't actually think was that huge an amount of money. Like I said, I was just watching the James Bond movies, and I feel like in one of them, it might have been Goldfinger, I don't remember, but one of them, the bad guys do a similar ransom for $200 million. Like that, I think they had to make it 1 million just to make, because otherwise it still sounds like a lot of money. But I just don't think $1 million was that much money in 1967 either. In any case, we get what they're going for. And it's better. Like, I thought that this joke, they tried to reverse it in Austin Powers 2. They go back in time, back to the 60s. And then Dr. Evil tries to ransom the world for $100 billion. And they laugh at him again because that is like an unfathomable amount of money. That's a joke that I mean, as we've seen, Mike Myers has never met a joke that he won't recycle and, beat to death. But I just don't think it's one that works. We didn't need to see it twice. It works here. That's good enough. There's the first nude prop comedy scene. I would appreciate those scenes more if the second movie hadn't run them into the ground, where it was like, oh, you like this? Here's more of it. And then, yeah, like you said, they went out for a night on the town in Las Vegas. That's when Burt Bacharach shows up.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Burt Bacharach.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but everyone.
Vanessa becomes a different person.
If Burt Bacharach was singing to you, though, wouldn't you become a different person?
That's true. If he was singing, in the back of the limo or whatever. Yeah. This is also a scene. They're doing like the classic, like walking in front of a green screen, and there's the Vegas Strip is like scrolling by behind them.
That part was funny.
Very similar to the first Wayne's World, where they're doing
I wish they had stunt doubles for no reason, though. That was funny. Austin Powers is like considerably taller than Elizabeth Hurley.
Right. There's another scene with a lot of vagina. They do the classic like James Bond. They're spying on each other, but also seducing each other thing. It was very dumb, but it worked for like, again, just kind of joking about how ridiculous this character is, like where he farts in a hot tub. And then she's like, make love to me.
How do you feel, Mr. Cunningham?
I feel extreme relaxation.
How dare you break wind before me?
I'm sorry, baby. I didn't know it was your turn. Pardon me for being rude. It was not me. It was my food. It just popped up to say hello, and now it's gone back down below.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Let's make love, you silly, hairy little man.
I say, hello, Vicar.
The best thing I can say about this scene is that it didn't, in every other case where Mike Myers is sexualized, it is deeply repulsive to me. And in this scene, I was able to tolerate it. So then we introduced the fembots as a plan for Dr. Evil to kill Austin Powers. One thing I appreciated
how this was resolved, actually, because I had it in my mind that they were the ones that stripped for Austin Powers.
Oh, yeah.
And it was completely a role reversal, which was so much funnier.
Yeah, where he's like shaking
later,
his butt and it makes their heads explode. I think the thing that I appreciated about the fembots this time is, like I said earlier, my girlfriend watched this with me and she was like, why are they like 60s sexy? And it's like, well, because they're specifically invented to kill Austin Powers. So like, that's what he finds sexy.
Invented by Dr. Evil, who is also from the 60s.
Yeah. So that's like cutting edge to him. So then we have, honestly, a pretty unremarkable scene where they're doing like the Q gadgets thing. I guess the funny thing in this is that
he has bad teeth.
She just tells him to brush his teeth. He like assumes it's some kind of, James Bond-esque, like the dental floss is a garroting wire or whatever. But she's like, no, you should just brush your teeth. There's been a lot of advances.
That was kind of funny.
It was pretty good.
Unremarkable, but.
Dr. Evil and Scott in Family Therapy is one of the parts that holds up.
It's breathtaking. I suggest you try it.
We have to stop.
It's so bizarre. And it kind of like the movie would be fine without it.
Right.
But it adds to it. Like that's one of the parts that made me laugh the most. It was like the dancing part at the beginning and then Dr. Evil's whole backstory.
And then we have like the designated drama scene where for some reason Vanessa is mad. I was confused by this. I didn't get the impression that him and Vanessa were in a relationship.
This is where it just gets kind of weird because they spent the night together, but they didn't like have sex. And then she kind of overreacts, I feel like, because they definitely did not establish that they were in a relationship. And suddenly she like has a problem with him sleeping with other women. It's just
right, especially because as a spy in the movies, sleeping with the person you're trying to extract information from is like one of the most basic techniques. Like I feel like a professional like Vanessa would not be hurt by this or feel like it's a betrayal, especially since, again, they do not appear to be in a relationship. So I don't know. It just feels like a plot contrivance. But that's when, now we kind of like see Austin as a human being. He's like catching up on all the things he missed out on. He was shocked that Liberace turned out to be gay. He makes the list of dead people. It was always like, even though Mama Cass choking on a ham sandwich is A, an urban legend, and B, like, kind of like a shitty fat phobic joke, just the juxtaposition of him writing down, Jimi Hendrix drug overdose, Janis Joplin drug overdose, Mama Cass ham sandwich. Yeah, like it was, it is what it is. And then it's like that stuff just kind of goes away, and now they're back on the mission, which again is not a criticism because this is a lighthearted comedy. I don't need it to be like a serious relationship drama. It's just kind of, it's funny.
Well, he apologized.
Right. So then they go to Verchicon and infiltrate the lair. One thing I want to point out. So actually, there's a few things here. Throughout the movie, there's these, I mentioned Ming T earlier, and there's these like short little 30-second interstitial, like almost like in the old Batman show where they'll just, for a scene transition, they'll have the Bat logo spinning and it's like, oh, they do that here, but it's Ming T playing like psychedelic music.
Which I think is really cool. I actually really liked that part. It's interesting. Only part I didn't like is the like proto love guru where he.
That's exactly what I was going to start talking. Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to start talking about. Because like at first it's just them with like a guitar kind of Hendrix sounding, and then there's a sitar. And he's like levitating or something, and it's like, oh God, this is the beginning of the Love Guru, isn't it? Like this is the moment when he came up with the idea for the Love Guru. And then when they're on the tour in Verchicon, he's wearing like a turban and a long beard, and I'm like, I didn't think anything of it. Like I think it was probably like at the time it was probably like a Peter Sellers kind of thing. But now it just feels like foreshadowing.
It's Chekhov's gun of what's to come.
Yeah. And this from here on, it's like very much a James Bond parody. They're in the evil base. There's a line that I like where Dr. Evil captures them and for some reason gives them those like shiny Nehru jackets to wear. And he's like, do you like my pseudo-futuristic clothes? I designed them myself. It's a very like, because that always happens in James Bond movies. Like they get captured, but then they're in this like, really lush surroundings and they're given these weird like science fiction outfits to wear. Then they have like an awkward dinner with the bad guy, and then he's going to kill them by dangling them over a tank of sharks or whatever. Obviously, this is the famous sharks with laser beams attached to their heads line that I feel like I at least definitely had a WAV file of. This was one of the lines I had a WAV file of.
I actually remember that too. I remember that specific WAV file.
I have one simple request, and that is to have sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads. Now, evidently, my cycloptic colleague informs me that can't be done. Can you remind me what I pay you people for? Honestly, throw me a bone here. What do we have?
Sea bass.
Right.
They are mutated sea bass.
Really? Are they ill-tempered?
Absolutely.
That's a start.
I thought it was funny. Apparently that whole thing, which is so like iconic, was born out of them not having the budget for sharks. So according to this oral history, they asked like the special effects guy, well, what can we do? And they were like, well, we can put bubbles in the water. So that's how they came up with the fact that it was sea bass, which is such an absurd touch. Also, this is the scene with Scott where he's saying like, we could just shoot him.
All right, guard, begin the unnecessarily slow-moving dipping mechanism. Close the tank!
Wait, aren't you even gonna watch them? They could get away.
No. I'm going to leave them alone and not actually witness them dying. I'm just gonna assume it all went to plan. What?
I have a gun in my room. You give me 5 seconds, I'll get it. I'll come back down here. Boom! I'll blow their brains out.
Scott, You just don't get it, do you? You don't.
It's no hassle. But all I'm saying, they're gonna get a. I'm just.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Look, let me tell you a little story about a man named Even before you start, that was a preemptive Just know I have a whole bag of with your name on it.
You know, it's just a good like parody of the classic James Bond, like, and it's the same thing in Batman too. It's like the villains always have these elaborate ploys where they could easily just kill them. You know, it's like low hanging fruit, but it's funny. I guess we kind of glossed over what the what Dr. Evil's plan was. It was to build a big drill that goes to the center of the earth and makes all the volcanoes in the world explode, which seems like something that would be in a James Bond movie. Because I mean, like, Goldfinger is one of the best James Bond movies, and I think the plan there was to make all of the gold in Fort Knox radioactive so that Goldfinger's gold was worth more. I'm pretty sure. So, you know, like, we're not far off.
I've never seen, like, I don't think I've probably seen like one or two James Bond movies, but I haven't like seen them when I'm like old enough to really sit down and watch them. Right. I should watch those because that sounds absurd.
One thing I'll also say about James Bond, because I've been watching the Sean Connery ones, Sean Connery's chest hair is only slightly more normal than Austin Powers. Like, the only reason why Austin Powers' chest hair reads as funny and Sean Connery's reads as like virile or whatever is because Austin Powers actually looks like the matted fur of an animal, whereas Sean Connery has the texture and color of body hair.
Do you remember that? I'll have to send this to you so you can put it in the show notes. But when I was doing those hair metal makeup tutorials, I went to Halloween USA and I found a chest hair wig, and it basically looks like Austin Powers' chest. And then the funny thing about the package was that it's a chest hair wig, and then it says on it, "Don't forget your wig cap." What you were saying earlier that Dr. Evil, he shaved his head to be Dr. Evil.
Right.
So he didn't have a wig cap on his head, but he had it on his chest, presumably.
Yeah. So, you know, they obviously have to stop this nefarious plan with all of the volcanoes exploding. They escape from the shark tank / sea bass tank. This is the scene where Austin Powers gets his cart stuck in the hallway. This is one of the scenes that I always remembered because I think about it all the time. Like, whenever I'm backing out of an awkward parking space, this scene just flashes through my head. Then he fights, you know, or like, what is it he says?
Vanessa, I can explain. See, what happened was I broke in trying to get to Dr. Evil, and then all of a sudden the fembots came by and smoke started to come out of the jumblies. So I thought I'd work my mojo, right? So counter their mojo. We got cross-moginations and the head started exploding. You know, that thing. And I ended up in my knickers here, and then...
I also always appreciated the Union Jack brief. This is the only time I've ever appreciated seeing Mike Myers' briefed ass, because it's actually like
that is true.
It's a good use of it.
Right.
Austin Powers would have Union Jack briefs. Like, I feel like that was good costume design. So like that works for the fucking white briefs can stay. Stay where they belong, in his pants.
And then, you know, it's just like James Bond stuff here from now on. Fights the henchman, confronts Dr. Evil. Dr. Evil sets a self-destruct thing and escapes again in a spaceship. They escape the lair, and now suddenly they're getting married, and they do the naked like choreography thing again. And then we see Dr. Evil is back in space, saying he'll be back. The only other things I have in my notes here that I haven't mentioned. So in all of the fight scenes, he yells judo chop whenever he does a judo chop.
Yeah, and that made me laugh.
I thought it got funnier. It's the rare gag that gets funnier the more he does it, because then later he just goes judo. It's like, it's just dumb. But I like it.
That was funny. Not even judo. It's literally just like hitting people with the side of his hand.
Yeah, right. And then at the end, there's a part, you know, where they're doing all of that choreography and holding Like, you know, she holds up like 2 melons in front of her boobs, and then she holds up a picture of boobs.
The part that made me laugh about that is when it's like, it's all stuff that you expect. It's like they got a fruit basket from Basil Exposition, and so they like first it's melons, and then it's pineapples, and then the part that made me laugh is when Austin was like, and who sent us this drawing? It's really weird, and it's like a realistic drawing of someone's boobs that she holds over her own boobs. That part was funny to me. That was kind of in the same vein as the My Old Lady gag in Wayne's World 2.
Right, but the part that took me aback this time was where he sits down and he opens up the thing that Basil calls him on, the like little, and I'm like,
it would just be a full like image of Mike Myers' dick and balls, and Basil Exposition is just talking
Basil
like
is
everything's
completely,
fine.
he's like not at all taken aback. Like, so I have to assume that he can't actually see them, or Austin Powers answers the phone with his dick fully in view so much that he's just no longer surprised. But, you know, we have our quibbles. It's not like this is a perfect film, but I liked it, and I was relieved that this small part of my childhood / teenagerhood remained intact. I can't complain. It's a good way to end it.
It really was, and I was pleasantly surprised. I thought I was going to hate it a lot more than I did, and I ended up actually not hating it. I ended up really enjoying it. So it doesn't. I will say that it doesn't bode well. Again, we're finishing up 2020 with probably what will be the last good movie. It's
and we're
completely all
a
done.
third of the way through. We're a third of the way through. So there's 2/3 left to go. And the very next movie is Austin Powers' Spy Who Shagged Me. So we're going to get Whiplash, I think. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I'm actually going to try over the next few weeks. I'm going to try to have an open mind about the second movie, because I will say I saw Spy Who Shagged Me in theaters, and I was already like an Austin Powers fan at this point. So I was like excited to see it, and I saw it, and I enjoyed it at the time. To be fair, I was 15 years old, which I think is the ideal age for this movie. So I don't think I'm going to like it as much. But when I saw Goldmember in the theater, which again, I came into it with hoping for nothing but the best, and I hated it. I hated that fucking movie. So I'm trying to keep an open mind about the second one, and maybe I'll find some redeeming qualities.
I am not optimistic that it will be enjoyable, but I'm interested to watch it at this point.
So yeah, let us know what you think of the Austin Powers franchise in general on our blog, on YouTube comments and social media. We'll read your comments before the next one, and we'll be back at some point in January 2021, ringing in the new year with the second Austin Powers movie. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Austin Powers, he's the man.